He called her stupid, but the next words she spoke made the whole room forget how to breathe. Boston's winter carried a kind of music, low, mournful, like the last note of a cello. From the 57th floor of the Celestia room, the city looked fragile, a necklace of lights strung along the frozen Charles River. Naomi Carter stood by the window, balancing a tray of champagne glasses that shimmered under gold light. Her uniform was spotless, her hair pinned back. Her hands, though graceful, still carried the faint roughness of someone who had once worked the dry soil of Deming, New Mexico. She had been 20 when her father's lungs gave out, choked by years of desert dust. Her mother worked double shifts afterward, cleaning offices, cooking for strangers, until cancer took her too. From her mother's last hospital night, Naomi carried one sentence like a prayer. "You don't have to be rich, sweetheart. Just don't let anyone make you small." Tonight, that vow would be tested. At the center of the dining room sat Prince Tariq al-Malik and his entourage, 5 men in tailored suits and the kind of laughter that expected to be obeyed. Mr. Ortega, the manager, had pulled Naomi aside before service. "That table decides whether we get the royal contract," he whispered. "One mistake, and we're done." Naomi nodded. She'd worked through fear before, through hunger, grief, the long nights of studying foreign languages in a one-room apartment with a flickering heater. But nothing had prepared her for this. As she approached with the champagne, one of the men stretched his leg, just slightly. Her heel caught. 2 drops of champagne spilled onto the pristine tablecloth. Then came the voice, smooth, low, and cutting. "Bint aswada hamka." Stupid black girl. The words were in Arabic, spoken loudly enough for the others to hear. They laughed, a quiet, expensive laughter. Naomi froze, the tray steady in her hands, her breath held tight in her chest. She understood every word. Bending to collect a fallen glass, she felt the sting of glass on her fingertip, saw the bead of blood bloom. And somewhere in that pain, she remembered her father's voice from years ago, warm under a New Mexico sun. "When someone tries to shame you, child, let the wind pass first, then look them in the eyes." She rose, straightened, and continued pouring without a word. Her silence seemed to amuse them. "She doesn't even know what I said," the prince murmured in Arabic. "They send their clumsiest people to serve us." Naomi finished the pour, her face calm, her pulse unsteady. When she turned to leave, they switched back to English, masks of civility sliding easily into place. The evening dragged on. They mocked the food, corrected her pronunciation, sent dishes back for imagined imperfections. Each insult arrived wrapped in politeness. When she described a French wine correctly, the prince interrupted. "It's Syrah, not Shiraz, if you respect the French." Her pronunciation had been perfect, but she only nodded, murmuring, "Yes, sir." At dessert, he struck again. His elbow tipped a glass of water across the table and onto his suit. The splash echoed through the restaurant. "Incompetent!" he barked in English, loud enough for nearby diners to look up. "You've ruined my jacket!" Naomi stepped back, voice calm. "I'm very sorry, sir. I'll bring towels right away." Mr. Ortega hurried over, bowing with apologies, signaling for assistance. The prince switched back to Arabic, his tone sharp and private, except not to Naomi. "This is what happens when they hire people for diversity instead of competence. An educated person would never make such mistakes." Naomi returned with the towels. She placed them gently on the table, then looked at him. Her hands no longer trembled. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked in English. Something in her tone, measured, almost serene, made him pause. Then he smirked, sensing a challenge. "Tell me," he said loudly. Do they really let anyone become a server in America these days? Laughter rippled around the table. And that was the moment, when the humiliation was supposed to finish her. She chose to rise. Naomi folded the damp towels, set them aside, and lifted her chin. When she spoke, her voice was low, musical, unmistakably Arabic. "Baklava tonight is made in the Najdi style, Your Highness," she said, "with rosewater syrup from your grandmother's region." Every man at the table froze. The prince blinked once, the meaning catching up with the sound. His advisor's coffee spoon paused mid-air. Even the pianist in the corner missed a note. "You speak Arabic," he said flatly. "I do," Naomi answered, still in Arabic. "My father used to say, if you understand a person's language, you can see their heart." The eldest man at the table, silver-haired and quiet all night, leaned forward. "That's a wise father," he said gently. "You learned well." The prince tried to recover. "Then perhaps you can quote Al-Mutanabi," he sneered. "If you truly understand our culture." Naomi smiled, just barely. "Of course, Your Highness." She closed her eyes for a breath, then recited, softly, clearly, the first lines of "The Night, the Desert, and the Horse Know Me." Her voice floated through the room, rich and steady. Even those who didn't understand Arabic felt the gravity in it. When she stopped, silence followed, deep, human, astonished. "The poet wrote," she said in English now, "that patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. My father used to say the same thing. Maybe wisdom travels farther than we think." For a moment, the prince had no words. His authority had slipped too quietly to name. The silver-haired man smiled again, nodded once, and took out a small card case. He placed his business card on the table. "Miss Carter," he said, "if you ever wish to discuss language and business, call me. Sometimes people like us forget what respect sounds like." Naomi didn't reach for the card. She bowed slightly. "Thank you, sir. I'll bring dessert now." As she walked away, conversations began again, hushed, uncertain. Mr. Ortega met her halfway, eyes wide. "What on earth did you just say to them?" "Nothing rude," she replied. "I just spoke in the language they used to hurt me, only I spoke kindly." The night finally ended. Naomi hung her apron in the locker room, shoulders aching. Chef Moretti, who almost never smiled, appeared at the door with a small piece of dark chocolate wrapped in silver foil. "Here," he said, "a sweet for the brave." She laughed quietly. "Thank you, Chef." "Don't let them take your dignity," he added. "That's the only thing they can't buy." Outside, Boston's wind cut sharp and clean. Naomi stepped onto the empty street, her breath turning to mist. The city lights shimmered off wet pavement, and she felt, strangely, lighter. She took out her phone, opened the voice recorder she used for notes, and whispered, "When powerful men think you can't understand them, they show who they are. But when you answer in their tongue, they see who you are." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, clutching the little piece of chocolate in her hand. Somewhere deep in her chest, something warm flickered. Small, but steady. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. The quiet kind that comes when you remember your mother's voice saying, "Don't let anyone make you small." Naomi smiled into the cold air. Boston was still cruel, still glittering, still full of people who looked through her. But tonight, she had looked back and spoken. And in that single act, in that single language, she had reclaimed herself. Morning came slow and gray over Boston, the kind of light that turns buildings pale and quiets the city's usual rush. Naomi Carter sat by the narrow window of her small apartment in East Cambridge, sipping instant coffee that tasted faintly of metal. Her hands still smelled of rose water and burnt sugar from the night before. She hadn't slept much. The prince's words still echoed somewhere inside her, not the insults, but the silence that followed when she answered back. She wondered what it had meant to him, if it meant anything at all. People like him never faced consequences, but something had shifted, even if only for her. On her counter lay a single silver business card, the one the older man had left behind. Mr. Ibrahim Al-Faraj, Chairman, Al-Faraj Holdings. The letters shimmered faintly in the thin morning light. She hadn't decided whether to call him. Part of her wanted to toss it away. She'd seen too many promises dissolve into pity. But another part, the part that still believed knowledge could change the world, told her to keep it. She tucked it inside her notebook and turned to her laptop. A paper draft was open on the screen, full of half-finished thoughts. In the margins, she'd written, "Language reveals power. Silence hides pain. Dignity speaks without words." Outside, snow began to fall. Light, uncertain, like the city itself was learning to breathe again. That afternoon, Naomi took the subway to Harvard Yard. She walked fast, head down, her black coat trailing just above the slush. The red brick buildings rose around her like an old cathedral of ideas, ivy clinging to their bones. Inside Boylston Hall, students hurried to lectures with coffee cups and unshakable confidence. Naomi felt like a ghost among them. She had once been the star student in her program, the girl who could pick apart a sentence in 6 languages. Now she was the waitress who barely kept her research alive. When she entered Professor Elaine Porter's office, the air smelled of old paper and peppermint tea. The professor looked up from her desk, glasses low on her nose. "Naomi," she said, voice cool but not unkind. "I heard you've been working nights again." "Just until I can afford next term's fees," Naomi replied. "Serving tables at that hotel, yes?" "The Celestia room." The professor made a small sound, a blend of disapproval and concern. "I understand survival," she said slowly, "but I worry you're losing focus. You're too gifted to waste your time fetching champagne for men who think money is a crown." Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe that's where the real lessons are," she said. "When people think you're invisible, they show who they really are." Professor Porter studied her for a long moment. "Just be careful," she said finally. "The world doesn't forgive brilliance in the wrong uniform." As Naomi turned to leave, the professor added, "And remember, the academic board will review funding next month. Your proposal must shine." Naomi nodded. "It will." But outside in the long hallway lined with portraits of men who'd never washed dishes in their lives, she felt the old ache rise again, the kind that came from knowing brilliance didn't always pay the bills. That evening she took the subway home, clutching a grocery bag that held 2 apples and a packet of instant noodles. The car was nearly empty. Across from her sat a young man scrolling his phone, the screen flashing a news headline in Arabic. Naomi glanced, her curiosity automatic. She caught a glimpse. "Prince Tariq Al-Malik attends Boston Investment Conference." Her stomach tightened. He was still in the city. She turned away, eyes on her reflection in the train window. The same tired girl, dark circles under her eyes, a flicker of fire still hiding there. Maybe she should have stayed silent. Maybe that night's defiance would come back to haunt her. But she didn't regret it. At home, her phone buzzed with a message from the restaurant manager. "Ortega. Need you at work early tomorrow. VIP lunch, same group. No mistakes this time." Naomi's pulse quickened. The prince again? Why would he return? She typed back a short, "Understood." Then she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, listening to the radiator hiss. Something felt off. Last night had been humiliating for him. Men like that didn't like to be reminded of it. So why come back? Was it business or revenge? She pushed the thought away and tried to sleep, but the night refused her rest. Somewhere in her half-dream, she saw the restaurant again, the flash of a phone camera, laughter, the prince's cold eyes. She remembered his assistant holding a phone when she spoke Arabic, recording her without permission. The thought stuck like a thorn. The next day, the Celestia room gleamed brighter than usual. Ortega was everywhere, straightening silverware, adjusting flowers, barking quiet orders. "Smile, Carter," he said when she arrived. "Today's the day we either secure a partnership or close the place." Naomi forced a smile. The prince's table was set with the same gold-trimmed china, the same heavy crystal glasses. When the elevator doors opened, she felt a strange weight in her chest. He entered. Same tailored suit, same entourage. But something in his eyes had changed. They looked colder, sharper. The lunch began politely enough. Naomi kept her head down, serving in silence, careful and distant. But halfway through the meal, one of the prince's aides, a young man with slicked hair, spoke in English, loud enough for others to hear. "Your Highness, the clip from last night already has views. People love it when staff try to act clever." Naomi froze. "Clip?" Her throat went dry. The aide smirked, scrolling his phone. "We edited it. Cut before she spoke Arabic. Makes it look like she spilled the drink and panicked. Perfect for the narrative." Naomi's hands clenched around the tray. So that was the plan. Humiliate her publicly, turn truth into a lie. A quiet revenge. The prince didn't respond. He only nodded faintly, eyes unreadable. But she caught a flicker of satisfaction on his lips. Mr. Ortega noticed her face pale. "Everything all right?" he whispered. "Fine," Naomi said quickly, but her voice trembled. She finished the service mechanically, heart pounding. When the guests left, she slipped into the staff hallway and leaned against the wall, trembling. Was there really a video? Where would it go? She thought of her professor, of her funding, her fragile reputation. One clip could destroy everything. Chef Moretti found her there, eyes red. "What happened?" "Nothing, Chef." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then do what my mother used to say," he murmured. "When the wolves circle, keep walking like you have a lantern. They don't like the light." Naomi let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, back in her apartment, she searched online for the clip. It wasn't there. Yet. But she found something else. A business press article about the prince's upcoming acquisition of Boston Grand Hotels. The Celestia Room was one of their properties. A merger worth billions, and any incident with staff could be used as leverage, a reason to lower the price. The video wasn't just revenge, it was strategy. She sat back, the pieces falling into place. Her humiliation, her silence, even her voice, all had been part of a negotiation she hadn't known she was in. Snow fell harder outside. Boston lights blurred through the window, and Naomi thought of Deming, of wind over dry fields, of her father's cracked hands, of her mother whispering, "You are not small." No, she thought, not anymore. She reached into her notebook, pulled out Mr. Alfaraj's card, and stared at it. Maybe it was time to call. Maybe it was time to stop surviving and start fighting back. Naomi turned on her lamp, the warm glow filling the room like dawn over sand. She dialed the number printed in gold. Her heart steady now. "Mr. Alfaraj's office," a voice answered. "Tell him," she said quietly. "This is Naomi Carter, the waitress from last night. I think we both need to talk." And somewhere, on the other side of the city, A story much bigger than her own began to move. The call came the next morning, just as the snow outside turned from lace to slush. "Ms. Carter?" "This is she." "Mr. Al-Faraj can see you at 11, Copley Square, the corner office. Do you need a car?" Naomi looked at her boots, salt-streaked, the laces frayed. "No, thank you. I'll be there." She wrapped her scarf twice and stepped into the cold. Boston was the color of tin, the wind needling through coats and promises. On the subway, a child pressed his palm to the fogged window to draw a crooked sun. Naomi smiled at it and felt, for a heartbeat, less alone. Copley Square, 11 sharp. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and money. A receptionist with gray hair and kind eyes led her into a room that looked like a ship's bridge. Glass on 3 sides, the city spread beneath like a map. Ibrahim Al-Faraj stood there already, silver hair, steady gaze, the quiet of a man who had outlived his rivals and the need to prove anything. He didn't offer to shake at first. He simply studied her face the way a good doctor studies a pulse. "You slept little," he said. "Less than I wanted." "Sit, please. Tea?" He poured it himself. Mint, hot enough to warm bone. "Last night my assistant told me something distasteful," he said. "There is a video. Edited to shame you. It is scheduled to be released this weekend." "To pressure the hotel sale," Naomi said. "Drive the price down." "Yes." He set the teapot down carefully, as if it were an old friend. "You could sue," he said, "but lawsuits are slow. The internet is fast. So what do I do?" "We shine a light before they strike." He slid a tablet across the table. A still frame had been paused at an unflattering angle. Naomi mid-blink, her mouth open just enough to suggest panic. The caption draft read, "Entitled Waitress Ruins Royal Dinner in Boston. Watch." Naomi's cheeks burned. She pressed play. The clip was short. Her wobble, the water spill, the prince's flare of anger, then a jump cut straight to her apology. The room where she had spoken Arabic didn't exist in their version of the night. Her dignity had been edited out. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way her mother taught her when hospital bills arrived like weather. "We need the truth," Al-Faraj said. "Do you have any allies inside the hotel?" "A few," Naomi said. "People who see more than they say." He nodded. "I will make some calls. But be careful, Ms. Carter. There are men who consider a quiet woman their favorite kind of weapon." "I'm not quiet anymore," she said. "Good," he replied softly. "Then let us make some noise." When she left, he pressed a card into her palm, another number, handwritten. "If you feel followed, call this man. If you need to disappear for a day, he will arrange it. I hope you won't." Outside, the world had unfrozen just enough to be treacherous. Naomi walked slowly, her reflection keeping pace in the glass, a ghost she was still learning to trust. Back at the Celestia room, Mr. Ortega was moving like a storm, muttering into a headset, repolishing silver already shining. He saw Naomi and motioned her into his office, a cramped rectangle with a plant that refused to die. "HR asked for you," he said, closing the door. "Apparently a guest complaint has escalated." "From last night?" "It seems so." He hesitated, the way a good man does before saying something that might wound. "If you need to take a week off, I can make the schedule work," he said. "But if there's a video and corporate believes it, I don't know how much I can protect you." Naomi nodded. "I appreciate that," she said. "But I won't hide." She headed for the staff hallway, past the linen room, the hum of the freezers, the familiar perfume of coffee and butter. Marco, the dishwasher with tattooed forearms and soft eyes, stepped into her path. "Hey, Carter," he murmured. "You got a minute?" For you? Always. My cousin is night security, he said. He pulled something. Don't ask how. He handed her a flash drive, small as a thumbnail. Full footage from the dining room. No sound, but you'll see the angle they won't show. Marco, she whispered. You could get fired. Maybe, he said. But my mom used to clean floors here. I know what it looks like when rich men think a girl is furniture. He tried to smile. It didn't quite land. Be careful, he added. The slick hair guy, Prince's aide, was asking who you talked to. He tipped a bellman 50 just for a name. Naomi slipped the drive into her pocket. That pocket suddenly felt like it contained a key and a fuse. That evening, she caught the red line to Porter Square and ducked into a tea shop where the tables were old wood and the owner knew how to leave a person alone. She plugged the drive into her laptop. The video flickered to life. Wide shot, the prince's table glittering like a necklace, Naomi's small figure moving through light. She watched it once, twice, a third time. No audio, but the truth had a shape even without sound. The water glass, his elbow, not her hand. The staff rushing in before she reached the table. Someone had signaled them early, like a fire drill timed to humiliate. She paused, zoomed. The aide with slick hair lifted his phone before the spill, angling not at the table but over Naomi's shoulder, toward the mirrored column that reflected her face. He was ready, not surprised. Then another piece fell into place. Timestamps. 10 minutes before the spill, the aide checked his watch, murmured something to the prince, and made a small gesture with 2 fingers tapping his own throat as if clearing it. Harmless, unless a person had seen it repeated. Naomi had. Twice last night. Once that afternoon. Always before a problem accidentally appeared. She scribbled in her notebook. 2 taps, equals, go time. Her phone buzzed across the table. Unknown. We should talk before the weekend. Unknown. Delete the footage in your possession. It's illegal to have it. Unknown. There are consequences. She turned the phone face down and thought of her father's hands scooping earth. Consequences, he'd say, are just the bill you pay for being alive. Pay it with your head up. She emailed a copy of the file to herself, then another to a new address Al-Faraj's assistant had given her. She added a message. No audio, but you can still hear the truth. On the way out, she bought 2 pastries she couldn't afford and handed one to a man on the corner wearing everything he owned. For later, she said. You an angel? He asked. Not today, she said. But I'm practicing. Friday brought a wet snow that stuck to eyelashes. In the afternoon, Naomi rode the elevator with linen carts and tired jokes. On the 37th floor, the doors opened unexpectedly. Prince Tariq and his aide stepped in. The air thinned. For a few floors, no one spoke. Then the aide smiled without warmth. You had a good night the other night, he said in pleasant English. Quite the performance. Naomi kept her eyes on the doors. I don't perform, she said. I work. And speak, he added. Languages you shouldn't. There's no language I shouldn't speak, she said softly. There are only truths people don't want heard. The aide's smile stiffened. He glanced at the prince. The prince's reflection in the stainless steel door was a study in control, boredom placed carefully over irritation. A pity, he said finally. Some people are happier when they don't understand too much. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. They stepped out without looking back. Naomi stayed inside a few seconds longer, letting the space refill with ordinary air. That night, Professor Porter called from a number Naomi didn't recognize. I got your email, she said without preamble. and I'm at an age where I take a taxi to indignation. Professor, no. Listen, you can't release that footage yourself. They'll bury you in rules you never agreed to but apparently must obey. But if someone else were to find it, say, a reporter with a spine, or a board member with a conscience. Her voice softened. You are not alone, Naomi, she said. Even if it feels that way. I know what they call girls like us when we refuse to eat what we're fed. They call us difficult. Fine. Be difficult. Naomi felt tears threaten and blinked them back. Thank you, she said, the words small but clean. Bring me a copy in the morning, Porter said, and bring whatever courage you have left. We're going to spend it. Saturday dawned sharp and blue. The river shone like hammered metal. At a little cafe near campus, Naomi slid into a booth opposite Professor Porter, who wore a red scarf like a flag. They watched the footage together. Porter's mouth became a thin, hard line. They'll say there's no sound, she said, but anyone with eyes can see what happened. I'll send this to a friend who sits on a certain hotel board, and to a journalist who owes me a favor from 1998. She closed the laptop and looked at Naomi the way you look at someone about to jump into cold water. There's another piece, Naomi said, hesitating. I think the video isn't just about me. I think it's about timing. The aide has a signal, 2 taps at the throat. Minutes later, something occurs. Enough to justify complaints. Enough to drag down a sale. You're saying they're orchestrating incidents. Yes. To gain leverage. Yes. Can you prove it? Not yet, Naomi admitted. But I can watch. Porter nodded once, decisive. Then watch. Quietly. Carefully. And write everything down as if a judge will read it with a magnifying glass. She reached across the table and squeezed Naomi's hand. Brief, fierce. And Naomi? Yes? I'm proud of you, not for speaking languages, for speaking. Naomi smiled, the kind that leaks into the eyes. The first shot came an hour later. Her phone lit up with a link from a coworker. Viral, waitress meltdown in luxury Boston restaurant. She tapped it. The doctored clip, cropped, captioned, cruel, was finally live. In the comments, a hurricane, strangers choosing sides, certainty in every keystroke. Some called her names. Some defended police who weren't there. Some defended men they'd never met. A few asked for the whole tape. A few asked for her name and address, which told her everything about them she needed to know. Naomi felt the cold press against her ribs from the inside. Then a second notification arrived, this one from a local journalist Porter had likely called. Statement from Celestia Room employee disputes viral video. Source claims full footage exists. She exhaled. Not victory. Not yet. But a hand held out in a dark room. The third message arrived from a number she now recognized. Al-Faraj's assistant. Board member has requested internal review. Hold tight. You did well. Naomi put her phone face down and stepped outside. The day was bright, the kind of winter brightness that makes you squint and hope. Students hurried past, scarves flying. A church bell tolled somewhere, the sound old enough to trust. She walked to the river. The wind lifted her hair and a gull screamed like laughter. She thought of Deming's dust and her mother's last words. She thought of Chef Moretti's chocolate and Marco's brave gift. She thought of the prince in the elevator, a man who had learned to confuse silence with safety. Not anymore, she said to the water. Her phone buzzed once more. A final message for the day. A photo, taken from across the dining room. Grainy, but clear enough. The aide with slick hair, 2 fingers tapping his throat, a tiny metronome counting down to harm. Naomi saved it to a new folder she named Lantern. Then she turned for home, walking steady, shoulders back, the way a person does when the night is coming and they mean to meet it on their feet. Sunday came gray and mean. Boston's skyline looked washed out, as if the city itself were tired of holding its breath. Naomi Carter stood at her window, a mug of coffee cooling in her hands, watching the snow melt into dirty rivulets along the curb. On the table lay three things: a folded newspaper with the headline, "Waitress Video Sparks Debate," her phone, silent but humming with unseen messages, and a memory card. Marco's backup copy of the restaurant footage. Each object seemed to hum with possibility and danger. She hadn't heard from Professor Porter since yesterday's meeting, but she trusted her to be working quietly, threading truths into the right ears. Still, Naomi knew the prince wouldn't let humiliation go unanswered. Men like him believed the world owed them applause, even when they lied. She opened her laptop. Her inbox had become a battlefield. Messages from strangers defending her, others telling her to go back to wherever you came from, and one, unsigned, that said simply, "You don't understand the game you stepped into." Naomi stared at that line longer than the rest. The game. The word tasted expensive and cruel. At noon, she took the train across the river to Back Bay, where the Celestia room was housed beneath the glass and steel crown of the Grand Boston Hotel. She wasn't scheduled to work, but her badge still opened the service door. The kitchen buzzed as always. Steel, steam, shouts. Chef Moretti saw her first. "Carter, you're supposed to be resting." "Just checking something." "You mean trouble?" He sighed, wiping his hands on a towel. "Fine. Trouble's in the storage hallway, security logs. Marco said you might come." Naomi smiled softly. "He's a better man than he knows." She slipped past the pantry into the narrow corridor lined with cameras and humming routers. The air smelled of metal and lemon cleaner. Marco was there, crouched by a terminal, his beanie pulled low. "You didn't hear this from me," he whispered, plugging in a drive. "Security cameras auto back up to cloud storage, but someone's been deleting fragments. Always at the same time, Mark." "What Mark?" "The two-tap signal." Naomi's pulse kicked. He scrolled through feeds, showing her patterns. Each deletion corresponded to a day the prince's group had dined. Each deletion followed that same gesture. Once in London, once in Dubai, now Boston. "They stage these things," Naomi murmured. "Incidents that damage properties before negotiations, then buy in cheaper." "It's like fixing a game," Marco said. "No," Naomi corrected softly. "It's stealing from the world in daylight." She copied the log files onto her phone, heart pounding. When she turned to leave, a low voice stopped her. "Miss Carter." It was Mr. Ortega, his face tight. "Why are you in security?" "Checking inventory," she lied. "Don't," he said, closing the door behind him. "The board is splitting over the video. The prince's lawyers are circling, and now I hear rumors you're contacting outsiders. I'm defending myself." "By dragging the restaurant into politics?" His voice cracked, half anger, half fear. "Naomi, they can shut us down. You, me, all of us. Please, walk away before you can't." Naomi met his eyes, steady. "If I walk away, they win. You know that." For a long moment, Ortega said nothing. Then he stepped aside. "Whatever you're doing, finish it fast," he muttered, "before someone finishes it for you." That night, Naomi met Professor Porter at a diner near the river, one of those places that smelled of coffee and old secrets. The professor wore a navy coat, her scarf wound twice around her neck. "I spoke with a journalist friend," Porter began. "She's interested but cautious. We'll need proof of a pattern, not just one incident. I have it, Naomi said, sliding her phone across the table. Porter watched the video. Deletions, dates, the identical gestures. Her eyes hardened. They've been manipulating markets, she whispered. It's not just your job, it's international fraud. Can we expose it? If we're careful. Naomi sipped her tea, the steam rising like ghosts. Careful hasn't gotten me very far. Porter smiled faintly. Then we'll be brave, but smart brave. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was an ID badge with a different logo. An old friend of mine works with the hotel's parent company. Tomorrow night, the board reviews the acquisition. You'll be catering the meeting. You're sending me back in? No one else can listen the way you do. You'll serve coffee, you'll smile, and you'll keep your eyes open for that signal. Naomi hesitated. And if they catch me? Then, Porter said, you tell them the truth. People like that never know what to do with it. Monday evening. The boardroom on the 60th floor was a cold cathedral of glass and chrome. Executives sat around a long table, faces glowing blue from tablets. Naomi moved quietly among them, pouring coffee, refilling water. Her borrowed badge hung steady against her chest. At the far end sat Prince Tariq and his aide, the man with slicked hair. He looked restless, tapping his pen, whispering into a phone he kept under the table. Naomi caught fragments of the conversation, words about final valuation, public sentiment, optics. Then she saw it. The two taps. Light, casual, just under the chin. Her breath caught. 5 minutes later, chaos. A projector glitched, lights flickered, an assistant stumbled, spilling hot tea across documents. A murmur rippled, perfectly timed disruption. While confusion spread, the prince leaned toward an executive, voice smooth. Unfortunate accident. Perhaps the universe tells us to reconsider the price. Naomi's fingers tightened around her tray. She wanted to shout, I see you! But instead, she memorized every movement, the time, the words, the tilt of his head. When order returned, she slipped out, pretending to fetch napkins. In the corridor, she hit record on her phone, whispering details into it. The elevator opened, and there he was, the aide, alone. You shouldn't be here, he said. Neither should you, she replied. He smiled, a snake's expression. Curiosity is dangerous, Miss Carter. So is arrogance. You think anyone will believe you? Maybe not, she said. But I have eyes, and friends with louder voices. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, the predator realizing his prey had teeth. Then the elevator chimed, and Naomi stepped in, heart hammering. As the doors closed, she saw him pull out his phone. By midnight, the file of her notes and footage had been sent to Porter, to Al-Faraj, and to the journalist. Naomi sat on her couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and hope. Outside, the city pulsed with distant sirens. She thought of Deming's open skies, the way stars used to look like holes punched in tin. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then, curiosity won. Ms. Carter, a voice said, male, accented, calm. Who is this? Someone who owes Mr. Al-Faraj a favor. Don't go to work tomorrow. The prince leaves tonight. There will be noise. What kind of noise? The kind that makes headlines. The line went dead. Naomi stared at the dark screen. Through the window, she could see her own reflection, tired, defiant, alive. She whispered to the glass, then let it be loud. The snow had melted into gray puddles by Tuesday morning. Boston smelled of wet iron and exhaust, that strange scent cities wear after a storm. Naomi woke to the sound of her phone buzzing again and again on the nightstand. When she finally answered, Marco's voice was urgent. "Carter, don't come in. Something happened. The hotel's on fire." She sat up, heart hammering. "What?" "Electrical, they say. 4th floor. But the kitchen's full of smoke, and security won't let anyone near the servers." "The servers?" "Yeah, the computers, not the people. They're wiping things. I saw them pull hard drives before the sprinklers hit." Naomi was already pulling on her coat. "Marco, get out of there." "I can't. Ortega's still inside trying to stop them." "Then I'm coming." She hung up before he could argue. The streets were choked with fire trucks and reporters by the time she arrived. Steam curled from broken windows. Water poured down the marble steps of the Grand Boston Hotel like melted glass. The air reeked of smoke and ozone. Naomi pushed through the crowd, her badge flashing in the half-light. A firefighter stopped her. "Staff?" "Yes." "Then stay back. It's not safe." But she slipped around the cordon anyway, through a side alley she knew too well. Inside, the lobby was chaos. Sprinklers hissing, alarms wailing, people shouting names through the fog. In the haze, she found Mr. Ortega, coughing near the bar, his suit soaked and half burned at the sleeve. "Naomi, you're insane to be here." "Where's Marco?" "He went after the backup drives. He said something about the storage room." "I'll find him." "You'll do no such—" But she was already running. The storage corridor was thick with smoke. She tied her scarf over her mouth and pressed forward, feeling along the wall until she found the door marked Security Archive. Inside, the sprinklers had failed. Heat shimmered through the room. Boxes of paper records burned slow and silent. Through the smoke, she saw Marco kneeling beside a cabinet, coughing, prying something loose with a metal rod. "Marco!" "Got it. Almost." The cabinet door gave way with a shriek of metal. He held up a small black box, one of the server drives. "This one has backups from the night of the dinner. We can prove they deleted files." A burst of fire leapt from the corner. The ceiling groaned. Naomi grabbed his arm. "Go!" They stumbled into the hall just as part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. An explosion of light and dust. Marco fell, the drive clutched to his chest. Naomi hauled him up, half dragging him through the haze. When they burst outside, paramedics swarmed. Someone shouted orders. Naomi sank to her knees on the curb, coughing, eyes streaming. In Marco's soot-blackened hand, the drive still gleamed like a secret refusing to die. By afternoon, the fire was out, but the news had already begun its own blaze. "Electrical failure damages Grand Boston Hotel archives," one headline said. Another, "Insider source alleges data deletion before fire." Naomi watched from a diner across the street as TV trucks parked in rows. Reporters shouted questions at anyone wearing a staff badge. Chef Moretti had found her a clean shirt and made her eat something. "You look like ash," he muttered. "Eat." "I'm fine." No one who says that ever is. Her phone buzzed again. Professor Porter. "Are you all right?" "Alive," Naomi said. "Good. Then listen, the drive Marco saved, it's gold. There's metadata showing deletions during your service night. We're sending copies to the journalist now." "What about the prince?" "He left the country an hour ago. But his aide's still here, and nervous. Nervous people make mistakes." Naomi looked out the window at the smoking shell of the hotel. "What happens now?" "Now," Porter said, "we tell the story before they do." That evening, Naomi and Professor Porter met with Leah Winters, a journalist from the Globe. They sat in the corner booth of an empty cafe, the hum of refrigerators masking their words. Leah was young but sharp-eyed, her recorder resting between the coffee cups. "I'm told you can prove coordinated manipulation," she said. "We can show a pattern," Porter replied. "Incidents staged before major acquisitions. Always the same men. Always the same timing." Leah looked at Naomi. "And you saw the signal?" "Yes. Twice." "Can you testify to that?" "If I must," Naomi said. Leah nodded slowly. "You realize once this runs, you'll be hunted online. They'll call you liar, opportunist, worse." Naomi smiled faintly. "They already have. But the truth doesn't need to be loved. It just needs to breathe." Leah switched off the recorder. "Then let's give it air." The story broke before dawn. Royal Investment Group accused of orchestrating market disruptions. Hotel staff provide evidence. Photos filled the internet. Naomi's soot-streaked face beside the headline, the grainy image of the aide tapping his throat, the prince at a gala 3,000 miles away. Within hours, financial blogs called it the fire and the truth. Stock prices dipped. Statements were issued and retracted. Lawyers circled each other like vultures. Naomi stayed home, curtains drawn. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, some calls angry, others kind, all too loud. Her body felt made of smoke and adrenaline. When Marco was released from the hospital, he texted her a single line. "They can't delete everything." She laughed for the first time in days. That night, the city was strangely quiet. Naomi walked down to the river, the same place she had stood weeks ago after the first humiliation. Snowmelt ran black between the cobblestones. She pulled her coat tight and breathed in the cold. A man stepped from the shadows. She froze until the streetlight caught his face. Mr. Al-Faraj. "You did it," he said simply. "Not alone. No one ever does." He handed her a sealed envelope. "The hotel chain is withdrawing from the prince's offer. My company will invest instead, under new terms. They'll keep you on, if you want, or fund your research, your choice." Naomi turned the envelope over in her hands. "You don't owe me this." "You owe the world your voice," he said. "It would be a pity to silence it now." He smiled then, tired and kind, and walked away into the mist. Back in her apartment, Naomi laid the envelope on the table beside the burnt scarf she'd worn during the fire. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she turned on her voice recorder, the one she used for notes, and spoke softly into the quiet. "Deming, New Mexico. My mother once said not to let anyone make me small. Tonight, I learned something else. Fire doesn't only destroy. It shows what's worth saving." She stopped the recording, closed her eyes, and listened to the faint hum of the city below. Somewhere, sirens wailed again, distant and almost musical. But inside her, there was only stillness, the stillness that comes when truth finally finds its voice. Winter lingered longer that year. By February, Boston's wind still carried the smell of salt and iron, the city caught between frost and thaw. On the Charles River, thin sheets of ice drifted like forgotten letters. Naomi Carter crossed the Harvard Yard just after sunrise. Her steps left prints in the powdery snow, each one a small declaration that she still belonged here. She hadn't been back since everything broke, the fire, the headlines, the chaos that followed. For weeks, she'd hidden in her apartment while the world debated her name. Some called her hero, others liar, but all agreed she was impossible to ignore. Now, for the first time, she was walking back into the institution that had once told her brilliance could not come in a waitress's uniform. Inside Boylston Hall, the walls were lined with portraits of old men in dark coats. Their oil-painted eyes followed her, silent jurors from another century. Outside the boardroom, Naomi paused, smoothing her coat. Through the frosted glass, she could see shadows, 4 members of the academic committee and Professor Porter seated at the far end. She knocked once and entered. "Ms. Carter," said Dr. Lee, the chairwoman, "please have a seat." Naomi sat. Her palms were damp but steady. "You requested reinstatement into the doctoral program," Dr. Lee continued. "Given recent events, we felt a discussion was necessary." Naomi nodded. "I understand." Another professor cleared his throat. "You were involved in a rather public controversy," he said carefully. "And while your integrity is not in question, the university must consider reputation." Naomi met his eyes. "Reputation is fragile," she said quietly. "Truth isn't. I didn't look for a fight. I just refused to stay silent when powerful men tried to rewrite what happened." The room stilled. Professor Porter's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. "The committee has reviewed your work," Dr. Lee said. "Your dissertation proposal, Language and Power, the Invisible Dialogue, has gained unusual relevance." She gestured toward a printed article on the table. The Globe's feature, "The Waitress Who Spoke Back." "You turned a personal ordeal into a case study of global significance," she continued. "That takes more than intellect. It takes courage." Naomi felt warmth rise behind her eyes. "We'd like to offer you full reinstatement," Dr. Lee said, "with institutional support, and a teaching assistant position, if you'll accept it." For a heartbeat, Naomi couldn't breathe. She looked to Porter, who gave a small nod as if to say, "See? The light finds its way." "Thank you," Naomi said. "I won't waste it." That afternoon, Porter walked her across the yard, the snow now glinting under a weak sun. "How's Marco?" Porter asked. "Recovering. He's talking about studying cybersecurity." "Appropriate," Porter smiled. "He's earned the right to protect others." They paused by the library steps where a bronze statue of John Harvard looked out over the campus. "I used to think this place was built for people like me," Naomi said. "Then I realized it wasn't built for any of us. We just make room." "That's all history ever is," Porter replied. "People making room where there wasn't any before." A gust of wind lifted a curl of Naomi's hair across her face. She brushed it back, eyes bright. "Do you think they'll ever forget?" "Forget what?" "That I was a waitress." "Let them remember," Porter said softly. "The world needs to know where strength really comes from." The weeks that followed felt like spring thawing the edges of a long freeze. Naomi taught 2 seminars, small rooms filled with students who listened differently now. When she spoke about the weight of words, they didn't just hear theory. They saw the woman who had lived it. She told them language could be a weapon or a refuge. That silence sometimes was the loudest voice in the room. And that humility didn't mean invisibility. In the evenings, she still visited the Celestia room. The restaurant had reopened under new ownership, Al Faraj's company, and the mood had changed. Marco now managed logistics. Chef Moretti had a new kitchen, smaller but his own. And Naomi? She came not to serve, but to listen, to the sound of clinking glass, to laughter, to human stories. One night, Chef Moretti saw her standing by the window where she had once spilled champagne. "You miss it?" he asked. "Sometimes," she smiled. "There's something honest about serving people." "Then maybe that's why you were never small," he said. "You learned to serve without bowing." But fame is a strange kind of shadow. It stretches even when you're still. Journalists still sent questions. Some wanted a book. Some wanted to know if the prince had apologized. He hadn't, and she no longer cared. One evening, a letter arrived with a foreign postmark. Saudi Arabia. Inside was a single page, unsigned. For what it's worth, I remember your voice. It spoke the language better than I ever will. Naomi folded the paper carefully and placed it inside her journal. Not forgiveness, not friendship, just acknowledgement. Sometimes that was enough. On the day her reinstatement was formally announced, Naomi stood again by the river. The ice had broken completely now, water moving free beneath the low orange sky. She took out her recorder, the same one she'd carried through everything, and pressed record. "Field note," she said, her voice calm. "Language isn't just sound. It's courage given shape. I've seen power try to silence truth with money, fire, and fear. But I've also seen kindness fight back, with a chocolate from a chef, a flash drive from a friend, a professor who believed." She looked at her reflection in the water, older, stronger, still her. "If this ever becomes a story," she continued, "I hope it reminds someone. The world will try to make you small, but your voice is already larger than their walls." She clicked the recorder off. The wind caught her hair again, tugging it toward the sky. Behind her, Harvard's bell tower began to chime. Slow, certain, forgiving. Naomi smiled and turned toward the sound, walking back through the snow, one quiet step after another, each print filling with light. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, plain brown paper, no return address, its corners softened by miles of travel. Naomi found it wedged in her mailbox under a stack of academic memos. She almost threw it aside until she saw the postmark. Deming, New Mexico. Her heart paused. It had been 8 years since she'd left that desert town. 8 years since she'd last seen the rust-red fields or the house with its cracked porch where her mother used to sit at dusk. 8 years since the funeral she could barely afford. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside lay a single folded letter, written in a looping hand she didn't recognize. "Miss Carter, we found this among your mother's things when we cleared the old house for repairs. She'd kept it sealed, labeled only, 'For Naomi, when she's ready.' I thought you might want it now. Pastor Ellis." Behind his short note was another, older, on yellowed stationery, her mother's handwriting. Naomi sat down right there on the steps outside her apartment, the letter trembling between her fingers. She read, "My dearest girl, if you're reading this, it means you've gone farther than I ever dreamed. Maybe you're somewhere cold, wearing one of those city coats I used to laugh about. I don't have much wisdom, but here's what I know. The world will try to measure you in ways that don't fit. Money, titles, skin, accent. Don't let them. You come from land that blooms after drought. You were born knowing how to wait for rain. Love is not the opposite of strength, Naomi. It's what keeps you standing when the wind takes everything else. If you ever forget who you are, come home to the desert. The dust will remind you. It remembers everything. Mama." When she finished reading, the city noise dimmed. She pressed the paper to her chest and felt something in her loosen, something that had been held tight for years. 3 days later, she boarded a plane west. Out the window, the landscape changed from gray Atlantic haze to brown and gold plains. By the time she landed in El Paso and rented a dusty sedan, the sun was setting, a giant copper coin sinking behind the horizon. Deming hadn't changed much. The same 2 stoplights, the same diner with its flickering neon sign, Sandy's pie and coffee since 1964. Even the air felt the same, dry, electric, alive. She drove past the old high school, past the boarded-up grain silo, until the dirt road narrowed into silence. At the end stood the house she'd grown up in. The paint had faded to the color of bone, and the porch sagged a little more. But it was still standing. A miracle, she thought. Like me. Inside, dust motes swirled in the slanting light. The furniture was gone, but the scent of old wood and soap lingered. On the kitchen wall hung a calendar from 2017, the year her mother died. The page was still turned to March. One date circled in red ink. Naomi's birthday, bake pie. Naomi traced the circle with her fingertip and smiled through tears. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the tin roof. She stepped onto the porch, wrapped in her coat, and looked out across the open fields. The soil shimmered faintly under the moonlight, like glass remembering the sun. She took out her recorder, the same one she used for notes and thoughts, and pressed record. "Field note," she whispered. "Deming, New Mexico. The air tastes like dust and salt. I think this is what memory smells like, half ache, half grace." A coyote cried somewhere far off. The sound seemed to carry 100 miles. "I came here to remember my mother," she continued, "but I think she's been with me all along, in every word I refused to swallow." The next morning, Naomi walked to town. At the diner, Pastor Ellis recognized her immediately. "Naomi Carter," he said, rising from his booth, his white hair catching the sunlight. "Your mama used to bring you in for pancakes. I'm sorry for your loss. Still am." "Thank you, Pastor. She was proud of you, you know. Said you'd talk your way into heaven or trouble, maybe both." They laughed softly. He poured her coffee and slid a slice of pecan pie across the counter. "You planning to stay a while?" "A few days. I just needed to see it again." "Good. The land misses its own." He nodded toward the window, where the desert stretched to forever. "This place looks empty," he said, "but it teaches the best lesson. What remains after the burning?" Naomi looked down at her reflection in the black coffee, and for a moment she saw both versions of herself, the frightened girl who left and the woman who came back whole. That afternoon she visited the small cemetery on the hill. The wind there was gentle, full of dry grass, whispering. Her mother's grave was marked by a simple stone her neighbors had pooled money to buy. Naomi knelt and brushed away the sand. "Hi, Mama," she said quietly. "You were right. The world tried to make me small, but I didn't let it." She placed the old letter at the base of the headstone, held there by a small rock. "I thought I had to fight everything alone," she said. "Turns out, I just had to remember where I came from." The wind moved softly through the mesquite trees. It almost sounded like an answer. That night, she stayed at a small motel on the edge of town. The bed creaked. The air conditioner hummed like a lullaby. Outside, the desert glowed silver under a full moon. Naomi sat at the desk, writing in her notebook. Words came slow but steady. "Deming isn't just where I was born. It's the measure of everything I've learned. That truth grows in dry places, that kindness is stronger than power, and that dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you keep, no matter who tries to take it." She closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling, smiling. Somewhere out there, her mother's words were still true. The dust remembers everything. The next morning, she packed to leave. At the town's edge, she stopped the car and stepped out one last time. The horizon stretched wide and endless, pale gold against a cobalt sky. She whispered, "Thank you." Then she turned east, toward Boston, toward the future that no longer frightened her. Back on the plane, she opened her laptop. On the screen, a new document glowed with its first title line. The Desert Knows. Lessons on Power, Language, and Grace. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she began to type. By the time the plane crossed the Mississippi, The first paragraph was done. I once believed intelligence was what lifted you out of small places. Now I know. It's what lets you see them clearly, love them anyway, and bring their light wherever you go. Naomi closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt no weight, no need to defend herself. Only peace, and the soft, endless hum of the engines carrying her home. The morning sun slanted through the glass atrium of the Cambridge International Language Forum, painting long gold stripes across polished marble floors. Naomi Carter stood at the registration desk, clutching the name badge that read, Dr. Naomi Carter, Harvard University panelist. Language, Power, and the Ethics of Translation. The words looked unreal, like something borrowed from another woman's life. For a moment, she simply stared at them, remembering the girl who had once cleaned tables, the smell of champagne and humiliation, the sound of laughter she hadn't yet learned to ignore. Now she was here, invited, not serving. She exhaled and pinned the badge to her jacket. The auditorium was already half full. Professors in crisp suits murmured over espresso. Graduate students hovered near their mentors, hungry for approval. Naomi took her seat on the stage beside two other panelists, a French sociolinguist and a Kenyan anthropologist whose laughter rolled warm and deep. Professor Porter was in the front row, her red scarf unmistakable even in the crowd. She caught Naomi's eye and gave a small nod, the kind that said, "You belong here." The moderator began. Today's discussion examines how language shapes the balance between those who speak and those who are silenced. He gestured to Naomi. Dr. Carter, perhaps you could begin. She rose, her heart beating steady as a drum. Thank you, she said, voice calm, sure. When I first began this work, I thought language was only about words. But I learned something else. Silence is its own dialect. It tells you who feels safe and who doesn't. The audience leaned in. I once worked in a restaurant where powerful men spoke freely because they believed the staff couldn't understand them. They weren't wrong about our jobs, but they were wrong about our worth. What I learned that night is this. When people think you can't hear them, they show you who they are. A murmur rippled through the room. Recognition, not pity. She continued, every language carries its own kind of dignity. It's not just grammar or accent. It's how we decide who deserves to be heard. And if we choose to listen, really listen, we discover that brilliance often hides in plain sight. When she finished, the applause was quiet at first, then grew, a rising warmth that filled the hall. From the corner of her eye, Naomi saw a man in a dark suit standing at the back, watching. Something about his stillness caught her attention, but the crowd swallowed him before she could place the face. After the panel, scholars approached her with questions, business cards, handshakes. One older woman pressed her palm gently to Naomi's hand. You gave every one of us who's been talked over a voice today, she said. Naomi smiled. I only borrowed it from the people who never stopped listening. When the hall began to empty, Professor Porter joined her near the refreshment table, balancing a cup of coffee that steamed like a small cloud. You were magnificent, Porter said. I was terrified. That's what made you good. The brave always are. They were interrupted by a voice behind them. A man's, low and deliberate. Dr. Carter? Naomi turned. It was the man from the back of the room, tall, early 50s, olive skin, faint accent. My name is Rashid Al-Faraj, he said. I'm Ibrahim's nephew. Naomi straightened. Your uncle helped me when no one else would. He spoke highly of you, Rashid said. Before he passed last month, he asked me to deliver something. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper, edges neatly folded. Naomi hesitated. I didn't know he'd died. Peacefully, Rashid said. He admired courage. Said you reminded him of someone he once knew. Then he smiled faintly. Perhaps you'll understand when you open it. Later in her office, overlooking the river, Naomi unwrapped the package. Inside was a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with Arabic handwriting. Elegant, looping, old-fashioned. Tucked into the first page was a note in English, written in Ibrahim's hand. Naomi, you once said that language can reveal who we are. This journal belonged to a translator my father employed during the early days of our company, a woman from Deming, New Mexico. She was your mother. She translated poetry for him when he studied abroad. He never forgot her kindness. When he heard of your story, he recognized her eyes in your defiance. I thought you should know that her words reached the world long before yours ever did. Ibrahim. Naomi's breath caught. She touched the ink, half faded, her mother's handwriting mingling with Arabic verses, lines of love poems, notes on translation, musings about sand and faith and light. Her mother had been part of the same circle of scholars that now invited Naomi to speak. She hadn't just told her daughter to stand tall, she'd paved the road herself. Tears blurred the page. That evening, Naomi walked along the Charles River, the same path she'd taken so many nights before. Boston's skyline shimmered in the water like a city made of stories. She took out her recorder. Field note, she said softly. Today I learned that voices travel farther than we think. My mother's words crossed oceans before I was born. Maybe courage is inherited, not through blood but through language. Through every sentence that refuses to be erased. She paused, listening to the steady hum of the city. And maybe the true work isn't speaking at all, she added. Maybe it's making sure others are heard after we're gone. A week later, the conference published her keynote online. The video spread quietly, shared in classrooms, community centers, and cafes around the world. Somewhere in Morocco, a teacher played it for her students. In New Mexico, Pastor Ellis projected it on the wall of the church basement, proud tears in his eyes. And in a corner of the internet once ruled by mockery and wealth, the same news site that had mocked the Waitress incident now wrote a different headline. From service to scholarship, the woman who changed how the world listens. Naomi didn't read the comments. She didn't need to. She simply sat by her window, the notebook open beside her, her mother's words whispering through time. That night, before she turned off the light, she wrote a line on the last page. Languages die when people stop believing in the dignity of others. My mother believed. So do I. Then she closed the notebook, smiled to herself, and whispered into the dark. Thank you, Mama. The desert remembers. And so do I. The wind over Riyadh carried sand instead of snow, a music Naomi Carter hadn't heard since childhood, the hum of a desert that spoke in whispers. It was her first time back in the Middle East since the night everything changed in Boston. The Global Forum on Language and Ethics had invited her to deliver the closing address. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same region whose prince had once mocked her now welcomed her as an honored guest. But this time, Naomi wasn't here for recognition. She came for closure. The hotel in Riyadh was a gleaming tower of glass and sunlight. From her window she could see the desert stretch into forever, an ocean of gold moving gently beneath the morning heat. She pressed her hand to the glass. Mama, she whispered. You were right. The dust remembers. A knock at the door. Her translator for the conference, a young Saudi woman named Mina, smiled shyly. Dr. Carter, the organizing committee will meet you downstairs in 15 minutes. Thank you, Mina. And please, call me Naomi. If you insist, Mina said, grinning. My grandmother has watched your lecture 3 times. She said you speak Arabic like someone born with the desert wind in her lungs. Naomi laughed softly. Tell her that wind came from New Mexico. That evening, the opening ceremony filled the grand hall with scholars, diplomats, and students from 40 countries. The ceiling shimmered like a sky of glass. When Naomi stepped to the podium, 1,000 eyes lifted toward her. She began in English, then shifted seamlessly into Arabic. Words, she said, are the oldest bridges we build. Sometimes they connect nations. Sometimes they heal hearts that were once strangers to each other. The crowd listened, still and reverent. Naomi paused, her gaze catching on a familiar silhouette in the second row, a man sitting slightly apart from the others, dressed in a simple dark thobe, his eyes lowered. Prince Tariq al-Malik. For a moment, the world tilted. The man whose insult had once broken her spirit now sat silent before her, anonymous in the crowd. Naomi took a slow breath and continued. Years ago, I served a table I wasn't meant to belong at. I thought dignity was something someone could give or take from me. But I learned that it lives inside us, quiet as breath, waiting to be spoken aloud. Applause rose like soft thunder. She ended with her mother's words translated gently into Arabic. Love is not the opposite of strength. It's what keeps you standing when the wind takes everything else. After the ceremony, people swarmed around her, handshakes, congratulations, requests for photos. When the crowd thinned, she saw him again, standing near a column, watching her quietly. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the prince stepped forward. He looked older than she remembered. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by something quieter. Fatigue, perhaps, or humility. Dr. Carter, he said in Arabic, you honor my country with your words. I honor only truth, she replied softly. He inclined his head. Truth can be painful. So can silence. They stood in the hush between sentences. I read the article, he said finally, about what happened in Boston. I deserved the shame it brought me. But you turned it into grace. It wasn't about you, Naomi said. Not really, it was about every person who's been spoken over. And yet I was the one who spoke. He looked away, then back at her. I cannot undo what I did, but I can listen now, if you'll let me. Naomi studied his face. The man who once sneered at her accent, now standing like a boy confessing a sin to his teacher. She thought of her mother's letter. Love is what keeps you standing when the wind takes everything else. She nodded. Then listen, she said quietly. Not to me, to them. She gestured toward the conference floor, where students and scholars mingled in dozens of tongues, Arabic, French, Swahili, Mandarin. Every person here carries a language the world once told them didn't matter. Listen to that. Protect that. The prince bowed his head. I will try. Trying is a good beginning. He hesitated, then extended his hand. Naomi took it, not out of pity, but closure. His palm was cool and trembling. May peace follow you, Dr. Carter, he said, and wisdom follow you, Your Highness. Later that night, Naomi drove with Mina out beyond the city's edge, where the desert spread untouched. The stars above were impossibly bright, the same constellations she had watched as a child from her porch in Deming. Mina laid a blanket on the sand. My father used to say the desert speaks to those who listen, she said. What does it say to you? Naomi asked. that we belong to silence as much as to sound. Naomi smiled. Your father sounds wise. He was a teacher, Mina said. He believed every grain of sand carries a story. Naomi tilted her head, listening to the wind hum softly through the dunes. It did sound like stories, centuries of them, carried in the same breath. She took out her recorder once more. Field note, she said. Riyadh, night temperature, 70 degrees, wind from the northwest. I met a man who once called me small. He spoke with humility today. The desert forgave him long before I did. She paused, looking out at the horizon. Mama, if you can hear me, your words crossed oceans. They reached him too, in a way. Maybe that's what healing really is, when the voice that hurt you begins to echo with kindness. Mina leaned back on her elbows, watching her. You speak to the wind often? She teased. Naomi smiled. Only when it listens. At dawn, they returned to the city. The sun rose over the dunes, turning everything gold. Naomi felt a calm she hadn't known she was missing, an understanding that forgiveness wasn't surrender, but release. In her hotel room, she opened her mother's old notebook. On a blank page near the end, she wrote, The language of the desert is patience. It teaches us that silence is not emptiness. It's preparation for meaning. She closed the book, set it by the window, and whispered one last time, The desert speaks back. I finally learned to listen. The train slid through New Mexico like a silver thread, sewing the desert back together. Naomi Carter sat by the window, her reflection floating over a landscape of gold dust and yucca bloom. The air shimmered the way it does when heat becomes light. 2 years had passed since Riyadh. Her book, The Desert Speaks Back, had been translated into 9 languages and taught at universities from Boston to Beirut. But Naomi wasn't returning for lectures or awards. She was going home, to Deming. When she stepped onto the platform, the town looked smaller than she remembered, but softer too. The cafe still leaned toward the highway. The church bells still leaned toward heaven, and the wind still carried that dry scent of sage and memory. Pastor Ellis was waiting near the parking lot in his old blue truck. Well, look who the desert blew back, he said, laughing as he hugged her. Harvard's finest. Just Naomi, she smiled. Always just Naomi. Got your letter, he said. You serious about starting that community school? Serious enough to stay a while? He looked at her, eyes shining. Your mama would be proud. The school opened 6 months later, inside the abandoned library on Elm Street. They called it the Carter Learning House, though Naomi never liked the name. She preferred what the children called it, the listening place. The first class had 12 students, ranch kids, farm hands, 2 children from a nearby reservation, and 1 quiet boy named Miguel who refused to speak at all. Naomi taught them English and Arabic side by side, 2 languages that rolled like wind and water. On the first day, she wrote on the chalkboard, Language is not what you speak, it's how you see. The children copied it slowly, their pencils scratching like tiny wings. Then Miguel raised his hand for the first time. Miss Naomi, he asked softly, what if you don't want to talk? Then you listen, she said. Listening is how words grow. The class smiled. Miguel did too. In the evenings, Naomi stayed late, dusting shelves, cataloging donated books. Sometimes she'd sit by the open window, recorder in hand, speaking notes for a second book she wasn't sure she'd ever finish. Field note, she'd whisper. Deming. Spring dust storms rising. The children read poetry in 3 languages today. Miguel recited his first sentence out loud. He said, I like the wind. Maybe that's enough to build a life on. One Friday, as the sunset spilled through the dusty windows, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Marco. He looked older too, with new lines around his eyes and a calm she hadn't seen before. "You didn't tell me the school was this beautiful," he said, looking around. "It's mostly paint and hope," she smiled. "But both hold well in dry air." "I brought something," he said, handing her a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was her old waiter's badge from the Boston restaurant, now framed under glass. Beneath it, a note in his handwriting. "Never forget where grace began." Naomi laughed, blinking away tears. "You always knew when to make me cry." "That's because you never let yourself." They sat outside after dusk, the desert stretching wide and endless around them. Marco looked up at the stars. "Do you ever think about that night in Boston?" "Sometimes," she said, "but only as a story that belonged to someone I used to be." "And now?" "Now I think about this," she said, pointing toward the school windows glowing with lantern light. "Every story deserves a place to rest." The following summer, Naomi received an invitation, an honorary doctorate from Columbia University for her contribution to cross-cultural empathy. She accepted, but not to celebrate herself. She brought 10 of her students to New York, their first flight, their first city lights. When they stood on the university steps, she told them, "This place once scared me, but it's just walls and names. What matters is who walks through the door." Miguel looked up at the towering buildings and whispered, "It smells different here." "That's how new stories smell," she said. During the ceremony, she carried her mother's notebook tucked in her bag. When they called her name, she walked to the stage, thinking not of applause but of the fields of Deming, of dust rising in sunlight, of her mother's hands planting seeds no one saw bloom. That night, back in her hotel, Naomi stood at the window watching the lights of the city flicker like distant campfires. She opened her notebook and added one final entry. "If language is power, then kindness is its light. I have spent my life trying to learn both. The desert taught me patience, Boston taught me courage, and the children taught me joy. Everything else was translation." Years passed quietly. The school grew. 2 buildings now, a small garden, a library named for her mother. Naomi no longer chased conferences or interviews. She taught, wrote letters, and sometimes, on windless nights, recorded her thoughts for no one but herself. "Field note," she whispered one evening. "Deming, summer rain after long heat. The air smells like forgiveness." When she turned 60, her students, now teachers, translators, and poets scattered around the world, returned to Deming for a reunion. They filled the courtyard with lanterns and laughter. Miguel, now a linguist, presented her with a small plaque engraved with her favorite saying, "When you listen long enough, even silence becomes language." Naomi looked around at their faces, the living proof of everything she had ever believed. "My mother used to say the dust remembers," she told them, voice trembling with warmth. "But I think it's more than that. I think the dust listens too. And tonight, it's listening to all of you." As the stars rose over the desert, she walked alone beyond the courtyard, the sound of laughter fading behind her. The wind moved softly through the dry grass, carrying whispers in 100 tongues: Arabic, Spanish, English, children's laughter, prayers. Every voice a thread of the same old song. Naomi closed her eyes and smiled. "Field note," she said for the last time. "The desert still speaks, and I finally understand every word."